Okay guys, welcome back. In this video, I'm going to give you a brief overview of the circuits and code required for this build. All of the source files required for this build can be found below or in the previous videos in this series, so be sure to check those out so you can follow along. The key circuit elements in this build are the Arduino Mega, Easy Driver, rotary encoder, and the OLED screen. Most of the wiring in this build is pretty simple, but one thing that might be a little unusual is the SCL and SDA pins required for the OLED screen. These pins can be found on the bottom right side of the Arduino Mega. As for the stepper motor, it's important to know which two wires are linked together in the same coil. The easy way to test for this is to short two wires at a time, then feel out the rotational resistance inside the motor. Using an unshorted motor as a reference resistance, eventually you should find out that shorting two wires will drastically increase the resistance in the motor. This tells you that those two wires are linked together, and by extension, the other two wires are also linked together. Once you've figured out which wires are paired with each coil in the stepper motor, you want to make sure you're connecting them to the right terminals on the Easy Driver. On the Easy Driver, you'll want to connect the first pair of wires to the holes labeled A and the second pair of wires to the holes labeled B. If this is your first time connecting up to an Easy Driver, you may want to use jumper pins and wires to connect the stepper motor. This way you'll be able to attach the stepper motor to your driver, test the direction it's spinning, and if it's the wrong direction, then all you have to do is flip the wires around to reverse the direction. For the rest of the wiring, you can reference the wiring diagram located in the description. So in this section, I'm going to give you a general overview of the code I wrote for the motorized slider. I'm not really going to get into granular detail, but I'll tell you guys the general idea of the various sections so you can go in there later and change things if you want to. So to start off with, we have the libraries up here at top. The main ones to note are Excel Stepper, Adafruit Graphics, and Adafruit SSD1306. The graphics library and the SSD1306 relate to the OLED panel that we're using for this project, and links to these libraries will be in the description. So continuing on, we have our variable declarations, pin modes. These two lines might be worth pointing out right here. So these relate to the enabling of the interrupt pins on the Arduino, and the values that they're set to currently are specific to the Arduino Mega or anything that runs the similar chip. If you want to use another Arduino, you might have to use these three links below to figure out what those interrupt values would be. So continuing on, we can see that the main loop is actually just really one line. It references a function called menu select. In menu select, we see that we have four options available: quick access, program, manual, and zero, and they're all accessible through a switch function down here. And at the bottom, we have the code for the interrupt, the rotary encoder. This is always running in the background. You don't have to mess with this stuff, but what this does is it just, whenever you do any action with the rotary encoder, if you press the button or you rotate it left or right, it always detects that, and then you can use that in your main code. So if we want to look at the individual functions, we can go to one of the top tabs, menu stuff.cpp. That's where the actual code is written for each one of these functions. Quick access is exactly as described. It gives you a couple options in there that you can set if you wanted to. So for example, the options are 10 seconds, 20 seconds, and a minute, and the last option is to return to the main screen. So if you wanted to change these, you would go down here, change the values. These are in seconds, and then you could make your own presets here. I figured that 10 seconds, 20 seconds, and a minute were probably the most convenient to set, and it's up to you what you want to define here. The next function I wrote is the manual move. This basically allows you to move the gantry back and forth as you please. I don't know if this is completely necessary for a one-axis machine like a motorized slider, but if you feel that it is useful to you, then it's there. The next function is zero system, and this basically homes the system back to a 0 point, and this function is actually referenced in several other functions because it's useful to zero the gantry before you do any kind of sliding motion. And you can see in the next function, create slide, that we reference 0 system there. So create slide allows you to program a custom time limit using the knob. You can choose any number of hours between these two limits, any number of minutes between these two limits, and any number of seconds. And of course you can change the limits as you want, but I don't really see a situation where you would need more than 120 hours. But if you do, then you can go in there and change that. And what that does is it calculates the amount of time and sends it into the next function, which is duration slide. What this function does is it just uses the total calculation of time, which is in seconds, and calculates steps per second. So how many steps the stepper motor moves per second. And then using the Excel stepper library, we can accurately control the speed of the gantry. And that's what the rest of this code does. And at the end, we zero the system again, because after we complete a motorized slide, we want the gantry to return to home so that we could do another one. And so these last two, menu generation, really is just for a user interface thing. It generates all the text and any kind of highlighting that happens on the screen. And the last function is time limit. So this is actually referenced before in the create slide function. And this allows you to set custom limits for any kind of time limit you want to set for your slides. Lastly, we want to touch on the functions.cpp tab. This tab actually doesn't have that many sub-functions inside, but what it does have are the counters for the menu system and the counters for the number system. Again, you don't have to mess with these. If you do want to change the menu structure, or if you do want to take advantage of the rotary encoder for other things, then you can use these functions as reference. So that's pretty much it for the code overview. Hopefully that gave you a good idea of the general sections you can go in and look at if you wanted to make changes in the code. Again, I plan on updating this code in the future as I add more features to the system, so stay tuned if you're interested in seeing those.